Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with the top minds and leaders from across the nation, and they graciously share their perspectives in ways that help advance First Aid Educate's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and really elevate school board leadership across our communities. I'm your host, Julia Keleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate, and thank you for joining us. Today, I'm excited to welcome a fabulous guest, but a friend as well and colleague, David Park. David's the president of Learning Heroes. It's a national organization that's dedicated to helping parents and families become active participants in their children's education. He's a proud alumni of public school, and he believes that the community is sort of the root of the power of a support system for a child's learning and development. And I agree. As Learning Heroes' first hire, so from the very beginning, he sort of built this organization. He's helped lead the growth and major national initiatives, including Go Beyond Grades, which reached more than 30 million people, and the Collective Action Coalition for Families. Before his time with Learning Heroes, David served as vice president of mission advancement for America's Promise Alliance, and he lost the Grad Nation campaign there, which helped drive historic gains in high school graduation rates. All things that are deeply relevant to Delaware. A lot of great success stories. We have something to share with the audience if you're not familiar with what First Aid Educate and Learning Heroes has done together. But his work has always centered on one idea, that when families and schools and communities work together, every child can thrive. So David, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your perspective on these important issues.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's great to be here.
So tell me, your work, I gave it in the overview, right? But I'd love for you to unpack it a little bit more for the guests. There's a common challenge in education. The assumption is, right, that family engagement is kind of like a box that you check, right? You either do it or you don't do it. But you've said it's not an event or a metric. It's really a strategy. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. And it's really a mindset shift, right? Because as you say, a lot of times when we think about family engagement, we're like, family engagement is the goal, right? It should be like families need to show up to our event. Families need to take our survey. We need to get more families engaged or involved in this way to do this thing, to do that thing. But instead, and through our Family Engagement Leadership Institute, which we have a national cohort of school leaders, we always emphasize this mindset shift that instead of thinking about family engagement as the goal in and of itself, think about family engagement as a strategy to reach your school goals, to reach your district goals, to even reach your state goals. So if you're focused on literacy and literacy achievement or math or chronic absenteeism or whatever it is that you were really focused on in your community, think about how you engage families as part of the solution. So families can be a strategy toward achieving all of these really important goals in communities across the country and across Delaware for sure.
So how do you get there, though? How do you get to a mindset shift? I mean, it makes sense what you're saying, that it shouldn't be, it's not a means to an end. It's a part of a process. But how do people start to think differently about it?
Yeah. So again, it's just starting with like, what are the goals that we're really focused on? So Delaware, for instance, and rightly so, is focused on literacy, very much so. And that's great, because the NAEP scores really showed that we have work to do in Delaware around literacy. But in order to achieve those literacy goals, we need to engage families. If we don't engage families, it's not going to be successful. And I know Delaware is already thinking about that, creating toolkits and so forth. But like, we need to think about like, what are the communications around this policy shift, that are going out to families? How can families be involved? What actions do we want them to take? What can we learn from families? All of these things are really important. And families, like I said before, can absolutely be part of the solution. We've seen time and time again. I can go back to when I first started at Learning Heroes. I don't know, I'm sure you remember sort of the Common Core debacle, right? And so with Common Core, a lot of people were focused on educators. Not many people were focused on families. And that really backfired, right? Because families weren't even, at the table at all, to understand what this is. And all of a sudden they saw these big changes happening, in their child's schools that affected them, and they didn't know it was coming and they didn't know what it was about. So of course there's going to be backlash. So when you don't engage families, there are going to be issues. You're not going to be successful. But when you do engage families in meaningful ways, and it's not always easy, but when you do engage families in meaningful ways, you're going to be able to have success in the initiatives you're focused on.
I know we're going to go through the example here, but just to give the audience a bit of an example of what you're talking about, like what's an example of a meaningful way to engage a family?
Yeah, so there are really a lot of examples that we have a lot of research on our website, which is bealearninghero.org. And so you'll see all of our research, but with our research, we include specific kind of tips and tools and strategies and show what this work looks like in action. So when we talk about like engaging families, one of the things, and this is just kind of one of the things that's really important, is obviously building trust with families. And building trust takes a long time. So how do you build trust? Families, if you're a school teacher and you're just calling a child's family when there's a problem, that's not going to build trust. When there's a disciplinary issue or something like that, and you're just calling because their son or their daughter really kind of messed up in this way, that's not going to build trust. A lot of schools, including some schools in Delaware, are doing empathy interviews with families or visiting families at their home to for no other reason than to get to know the family and their background and their wisdom and to understand their hopes and dreams for their child. And so building those relationships, those trusting relationships, it again takes time, but it's so important because once you build trust, you're able to have an ongoing relationship with that child's family, and that's going to lead to better outcomes.
Interesting when you said, learn from families you mentioned earlier, and then kind of I could imagine at the beginning of the school year when, a teacher gets a new set of 30 students, they really don't know those children yet, right? But if you had a home visit with a parent, the parent can tell you so much about their child. And that kind of saves the teacher a lot of time figuring out, oh, what motivates, Julia, for example, in class.
That's absolutely right, and it's all about sort of what interests the child. What are they really excited about when it comes to learning? That kind of information is just really, really important for teachers. As they understand sort of the differences. All kids are different. All families are different, and so understanding those differences and getting that knowledge from families is incredibly important.
So talk a little bit about what First Aid Educate explored the opportunity to do go beyond grades with Learning Heroes. And so talk a little bit about, if you can, about the difference in perception that sometimes parents have between how well their students are doing and how they're actually doing and kind of why that happens.
Yeah, so Learning Heroes has been doing research, both qualitative and quantitative research, for 10 years now. And we've got now 10 years of insights. We just came out with a report called Centering Families in the Future of Education, which again is on our site. And it's insights from 10 years of research, as well as kind of how community organizations and schools and districts and states are using this research to guide their work. So it's really practical. But one of the things that we first found in 2016 is that 90% through our research is that 90% of parents nationwide think their child is at or above grade level in reading and math. And just think about that for a minute. 9 in 10 parents, and this is regardless of race or income or geography or age or education level, think that their child is at or above grade level in reading and math. Well, we know here in Delaware, I just looked up the results, the NAEP results today, and it's like only 23% of 8th graders in Delaware, according to NAEP, reach the proficient level. So that's a big gap between the 90% of parents who think their child is at or above grade level and the 23% of 8th graders who are proficient in reading. So that's a huge gap. And so why that matters, Julia, is that if parents have an inflated view of their children's achievement, they might not sign up for the tutoring that child needs, or maybe a summer enrichment program which really help that kid get prepared for the next grade. And so we feel like part of our work is all about helping families have a more accurate picture of their child's achievement. And I will add that we know why they have this overly rosy picture, and that's basically, it comes down to report cards and grade enforcement. When we asked through our Gallup poll, we found that 80% of parents nationwide said their kids bring home A's and B's or the equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
So 80%
Mm-hmm.
of parents are getting A's and B's in a report card, and report cards how they
Mm-hmm.
gauge their child's achievement. So it's no wonder that parents have an inflated view of their child's achievement. But what
Mm-hmm.
teachers tell us is that report card grades don't necessarily equate to grade level mastery. So they take into consideration, did the child show up to school? Did they participate in school? Did they hand in their assignments? All of these things are important. And I'm not saying report cards aren't important, because they are. But there are a lot of other measures that would help parents have a more accurate picture of where the child really is. And the number one thing, real quick, that that teachers say that's important for parents to understand or to do in order to gauge their child's achievement is ongoing communication with the teacher.
Mm. So I had interviewed someone who your thought about I'm pulling on this thread of what does the report card actually reflect, and someone had suggested to me the idea of putting the test score, the assessment results on the report card,
It's great.
so that you would see both so you like that idea.
I
You
love
think
that idea.
seeing
Yeah,
them
and
together.
actually they're doing that in Tennessee. They actually, and it was a parent group out of Nashville, of Nashville Propel, that helped, and Memphis Lift also. So these are parent advocacy groups in that state that came together and said, hey, we need to put grade level on report cards. And so that's become law in the state of Tennessee. And that's a huge win, because that will, hopefully cause more families to ask, all right, because we know with more information, that 90% of parents, we've seen this empirically, that when parents have more data and information, that 90% starts to shrink. They start to all of a sudden wonder, based on state assessment data and other data that's available to teachers. If that's available to parents and they look at that, they begin to really question whether or not their child is on grade level.
So this is all fascinating as a baseline for the audience. I would love to share the story of Hyacinth Lewis and McCullough. Colonial, I have a great deal of respect for the superintendent of Colonial School District. I think the teachers and the educators that I've met there doing a fabulous job. And Hyacinth herself is just a remarkable person. Could we talk about, what was your experience of us sort of bringing this opportunity to the school and how that worked out, and kind of what you think the benefits were?
Well, first of all, a huge thank you to First State Educate and to you, Julia, for making this happen. I mean, that really was game changing, I think, for the school, and really helped the district as well. So yeah, we were able to include Hyacinth as part of our national cohort of the Family Engagement Leadership Institute. And so she took part in this year-long institute with her action team. And through this institute, we like to have educators and education leaders do what we call safe to fail experiments. And so these are not huge bets, but they're experiments in their schools to further engage families. And so through McCullough's participation in the Family Engagement Leadership Institute, and I just recently went back and looked at their action plan, they piloted new ways of sharing student reading data with families, which is really important, kind of sitting down with families and explaining what this reading data means. They redesigned family conferences. Family conferences are like 15 minutes and they're rushed, and usually you show kind of a picture that the child drew and you're like, oh, that's nice, and then you leave. Well, this actually, they redesigned the family conferences so that it gave parents more of an accurate picture of where their child really is. They held empathy interviews and home visits, like we talked about, with parents, so that parents could really share their hopes and dreams for their child's education. And they reshaped events. We all like to go to events with food and games and music and things like that, but they actually reshaped these events so that they were focused on learning. They were still fun, but they were really focused on what parents can do when they get home to support a child's learning. So amazing things that came out of that institute.
So it was data reshaping some things that exist, and then actually connecting in meaningful ways. That could be like a model, right? For maybe other schools.
Absolutely. And I would love to see more schools and more districts participate, because the stories that we hear after school leaders participate in FELI are just amazing. We always have this exercise where we say, let's hear what you used to think and what you think now. And so we'll hear things like, we used to think that, parents were kind of a problem, and now we think that parents are really part of the solution, and we understand how valuable parents can be, for us in terms of educating their children.
Their test results went up at the end of last year too. So
That's great to hear.
kudos again, to the whole team. So what are common, it sounds great, right? But there's got to be a reason why everyone's not doing it. So what are some common challenges that states or districts face when they're trying to move in this direction?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of challenges. I mean, one of the things is it takes a while to build trust. Trust is the most important thing. And, a lot of times families have not had great experiences with the public school systems themselves. So building that trust takes a lot of time. Not everybody can do these home visits or these empathy interviews. You have to prioritize it. You have to have leadership that understands it. You have to give the time. You have to do the training. All of that stuff takes time, but it's well worth it. So that's kind of one of the key challenges. But one of the things that we found is that once schools like McCullough, when they start to make these little changes, they can just build on that. And that's when it really becomes real, and you start to see differences. You start to see that that student outcomes are improving. Back in 2023, we launched the first phase of what we called the Family and Community Engagement Impact Study. And we did this with TNTP and with the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And what we found was that schools that focused on family engagement pre-pandemic, meaningful family engagement, fared better post-pandemic in terms of lower rates of chronic absenteeism and higher rates of student achievement. So we have empirical data that shows the impact of family engagement. The second phase of that study is going to be released in March. And what that will show is what specific practices led to these outcomes. So we'll be able to share with you some more information in March that's all around the specific practices. But I guarantee you a lot of them are going to be the practices that Hyacinth had implemented in McCullough.
That's fabulous. Yeah, that's great. And I do, people know it, right? But I think it's great to have opportunities to demonstrate it and to teach it, that families can be a big resiliency factor for kids, right? And so when they're there and they're present and they have an opportunity to meaningfully engage, it helps. But I want to connect that. If you could help me connect that, because First Aid Educate's focused on school boards, right? So
yeah.
How do we connect this to the work that school boards do, right? What can a school board do to make this more likely to happen, or to create conditions where this kind of meaningful family engagement grows?
Yeah, no, is a great question. And the work that you're doing with school boards and the trainings around school boards. And I actually heard one of your podcasts just recently talking about a school board member who was talking about like how important it is to get that training to be on a school board, because a lot of people don't know what school boards do, Right. And so that training is so essential. And school boards are essential because they really set the priorities, for schools, and they create the conditions that can make family engagement sustainable. So even looking, and I did a little research about what school boards have done, specifically in Delaware, and one that came up, and Red Clay Consolidated School District in Delaware has really made family engagement a priority, and it's part of their new strategic plan, kind of front and center in their strategic plan. And so this involved, having a Red Clay Parent Advisory Council. That's really kind of instrumental in kind of helping schools make decisions around student outcomes. And so that kind of leadership is incredibly important, in terms of family engagement. School boards can also support professional learning. So we talked about the Family Engagement Leadership Institute. A lot of times, they'll have, states will have and districts will have these policies around literacy, around chronic absenteeism, whatever. Well, obviously the teachers are the ones that are communicating these policy shifts with families. So they need to have the training on how to work effectively with families. And unfortunately, a lot of times educators just haven't done the training. They don't have the training on how to have meaningful conversations with families. And that's where Family Engagement Leadership Institute can really play a key role.
And I think it's interesting. It's come up twice now, so I think I'm gonna take the opportunity to make a comment about it. But it's no one would say that it's a good idea to put people in a role without adequately preparing them for the performance demands of the role that you place them in. No one would want to be in that position, right? We wouldn't, if we were running a business, we wouldn't put people in positions and not give them the tools, knowledge, skills, abilities, whatever, to do the job that they were tasked to do. And yet we are currently in a situation where the environment hasn't developed this training capacity. So for boards, for example, there's not a whole, well, we've created it, right? There's a whole library and a series of courses and digital badges you can earn, right? But that didn't exist. And I think same thing you're saying for the teachers, unless you took a course as part of your education program on how to do this, you more than likely graduated with great classroom management skills, knowing how to build an assessment, understanding scope and sequence, but not this. So if people are in these roles, I think there's no, it's not a like giving training doesn't mean there was a deficit. Giving
Right.
training just means that this is the thing that you have to do as part of your job, and so the ecosystem is gonna make that available to you, and that should be, in my opinion, for whatever role, that should be the norm.
I couldn't agree more. And I think more and more school districts are starting to see that. And
Mhm,
my hope is that when we release the next phase of this family and community engagement study and really show
mhm,
the impact that family engagement can have on school
mhm,
goals and state goals, state education goals,
mhm,
then my hope is that more and more schools start to offer training for their
mhm,
educators on family engagement,
yep,
because families want it. Families want to have honest conversations with
mhm,
their child's teacher about their child's achievement. They care about nothing more than their child's learning and well-being. And so, of course, and we know this through our research that families really, their number one priority is having open and honest conversations
mhm,
around their child's achievement. And in order to do that, educators need the training to have those
mhm,
conversations. Right now, they're having those conversations, but they don't necessarily have the training on how.
right,
And it's not easy; it's hard work. And so that training is
mhm.
incredibly important. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So this brings us to, I want to round out our episode today. I did want to take advantage of. I mean, 10 years of doing this. That's a decade of research. Come on, what are the? There's got to be some big secrets, right? There's got to be these tips. You've given a lot during the show already, but kind of, if you called out a couple things, for example, the example in red clay, or what is it that when you say, you know, here are the five things that and this is your opinion there. I mean, the research is there, but it's how each person shows up and but what's most important to you? What do you think the top 3, 5 drivers are that we should have front of mind?
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, I'd say, putting together this research project called Centering for Families in the Future of Education.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of work, labor of love, but it was a lot of fun as well because got
Mm-hmm.
to look through 10 years of qualitative and quantitative data and pull out like one insight for every research project that we did, and so it was a lot of fun putting it together. I will say we've talked a lot about a lot of it today. The mindset shift is really
Mm-hmm.
really important. Kind of really thinking of family engagement as a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I will also say though there are a lot of families who have kids with learning differences.
Mm,
And one of the insights was all around navigating the journey of kids with learning differences. 1 in 5 kids has a learning difference.
mm-hmm.
And so there are some tools and tips and examples of kind of working with families of kids who have learning differences to help through
Mm-hmm.
the navigation, the diagnosis, the ongoing work with those families and kids. And then also, interestingly, still a lot of communications that come from states and
Mm-hmm.
districts are full of edu jargon. They're the way
Mm-hmm.
that kind of education leaders would talk to each other, or
Mm-hmm.
academia would talk to each other, but not necessarily ways that we would talk to families. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of research in there about words that we use in our communication with families and the ways that families interpret that, so that when we say things like executive function,
Mm-hmm.
parents are like, does that mean going to the bathroom? I mean, what is that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Climate and culture, is that the air conditioning? And when
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hispanic parents hear culture, they're like, oh my gosh, is this about immigration? So we really need to think about the words that we use and the way that we communicate with families.
Those are great examples. I mean, they just really drive home the point. I mean, and a lot of those words, it's like you mentioned earlier, the Common Core. It's like high standards. You know what I mean? Like what exactly does that mean? And I think maybe, and I might be simplifying this a bit, but it's kind of coming back to the conversation on a human level, right? Like two people just talking about what's best for Julia when she's in the classroom,
That's
right?
exactly right.
And how does Julia feel safe, and how does Julia like to engage, and what's hard for Julia? You know what I mean? And in kind of the most basic terms,
In the most basic terms, yeah. There's two friends having a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately, we have to kind of use all of this jargon. I don't know, maybe it makes us feel a little bit smarter or something, but it just doesn't really resonate with families, and it doesn't create connections with families. And I think that's what it's all about. It's creating connections with families and making sure that we think of families as just such incredible funds of knowledge for us, whether we are a school board member or a teacher or a state leader, a policymaker. If we can learn so much from families, and that's part of the reason we've done so much research and listened to families for so long, because they have so much to teach us.
Totally. I totally agree. This has been super instructive for me. Well, I want to close on a data piece, just to pull it through. You've done research studies, so there's sort of this applied research. You're doing interventions, you're collecting data, you're evaluating the impact you're getting. I mean, and I respect that. I think, First Aid Educate chose to engage and do a collaborative project because we respected what you were bringing to the table, right? It wasn't like you just had this fancy idea and why don't we just try, you know what I mean? Like it was really grounded in research. And I think that's a starting point. That's like a requirement. That's not a nice to have. So, but not everybody does it. So compliments to you for that kind of discipline in your practice. But for districts, what kind of data should they be looking at? Is it like who comes to the parent night, or is it who comes to, is it attendance? Is it all of the data? What if a district wanted to start and say, all right, I want to figure out if this would help me. Where are the first couple places that they should look to see if maybe they should reach out and put someone in FELI and go through this training program just like Hyacinth did?
Yeah, I think really they need to listen to the families in their community, and any opportunities they have to, whether it's surveys or just kind of listening tours or just understanding sort of what are the priorities that families have, really kind of starting from a listening standpoint is always helpful, just to really kind of understand, because the community may have different priorities than what the district has or what a school board has, and really kind of understanding those priorities are really essential.
Yeah, and a survey is a good way to collect data. So it's not just sort of intuitive. This is what I think, right? But you actually have a beat on it. Yeah,
that's right. Absolutely.
David, what a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. I've taken a lot. I think mind shift, how we can learn from families. These home visits are another great, easy to do, making sure that parents have an accurate picture, working together with parent advocacy organizations. The Hyacinth example, what Dr. Lewis did in her school, and the model that she created, right? Redesigning these family conferences and making events fun, but building trust, really. And I think trust in small wins. So we don't have to, eat the elephant all at one time. What we've got to do is listen and then set a goal and just make small progress, and we'll get there.
That's right. Thank you so much, Julia.
No, sure. My pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. You can find additional resources on family engagement in our Knowledge Hub, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much.